Thank you for tuning in to another edition of the Monday After Preachers podcast. Looking forward to this great conversation today. Listen, if you have not tuned in to our latest episodes or even last season 1, I'm telling you, you're missing a treat. Go check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podvine, YouTube. There's some amazing content with amazing guests. I promise if you check it out, it's going to enhance your life the better. And so we're grateful this particular episode to have an amazing guest. Listen, our focus is holistic health in an evolving climate. So it's my desire to keep the conversation going for the clergy community as we push kingdom forward on what I believe is uncharted territories as we move forward. Listen, we got an amazing guest this week. He is Pastor Joey Foster from the Fresh Church. He is a church plant guru. He is my classmate. We went to seminary together. He's an amazing brother. Pastor Joey and his wife, Pastor Sonia Foster, planted the church, a Fresh Church, in 2015. They are cutting edge, they're innovative, they're relevant, and they're thriving as a ministry. If you don't believe me, go check out their social media or tune into their services. You'll see everything that I'm saying. That's what they're doing. The Fosters have developed a breathtaking ministry model that consists of outreach and in-reach. And they continue to grow by leaps and bounds there in the beautiful city of Dania Beach, Florida. And so my personality, they are the model blueprint for church plant. Had I known what church planting was when I was started, I would have probably consulted Pastor Foster when I started out on my journey, because I believe he is one of the best down here to do church plant. Pastor Foster has a BA Biblical Studies from one of the greatest institutions in South Florida Bible College Theological Seminary, and he's on the road to getting his Master's of Divinity from this great institution. Welcome to the show, Pastor Joey Foster. What's going on, my brother?
Hey, listen, man, after an intro like that, I'm trying to figure out who else is coming, because clearly some of that stuff you said, man, I don't know who that applies to. Listen, I'm excited about being here.
Yeah, man.
You have had some straight up heavy hitters throughout these podcasts, and I'm glad that today is going to be a commercial break for all of that. So
yeah, right, man. Man, I'm excited to have you on. I know you're going to give us some great insight, great wisdom, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation. Listen, before we get into the conversation at hand, I ask all my guests this particular question, and the question is, what are some intentional practices that you employ to ensure your holistic health?
Oh man, a great question. Intentional practices. So one of my most intentional practices is the Sabbath. Mm-hmm. Is practicing a Sabbath every single Monday for me. It is an intentional one. Now that hadn't always been the case, especially as you stated, church plant. I was on go for 7 straight days a week. I did that for years until I seen the pride in that. Right, I seen the pride that I didn't necessarily know that I was operating in a space to trust God to do less with. To do more with less. So me intentionally saying Monday, so Sabbath for me, just in a practical sense, Sabbath for me means I'm not doing anything church related. And that's difficult because I love church planning and I love ministry work. So it's hard for me to do, but I'm not doing anything church related. Even if I go to the church, I can't do anything. All I can do is sit in my office. So oftentimes on Mondays, I try to stay away from the church and just really do things that kind of take my mind other places, man. So beach time, kicking it with my girl, hanging out with the kids. For me, it's the unplugging on a Monday for me. Yeah.
And so what I failed to mention in my introduction, they have a wonderful marriage ministry. They're getting ready to have a major event that we'll discuss later on, but so your Sabbath is your priority. And so many pastors don't believe in the Sabbath, like you said, especially church plant, when you feel like the weight of the responsibility is on you as a pastor. You feel like you always have to do something. But it's important, of course, to take out time to rest and rejuvenate. So listen, man, I got you on the hot seat, and I realized this. Yeah, I got you on the hot seat. I realized this after we talked about you coming on the show. I was like, why did I pull Foster on to talk about this particular topic? And I want to put the disclaimer out there. This is no jabs at anybody. We're talking about holistic health. Yes. And I feel like this particular topic is very necessary in the clergy community. And so I'm sure it's going to be helpful. So, Pastor Foster, I want to center our conversation around the image and the integrity of the clergy community, those that are part of it, and its effect on our holistic health, because I think it's majorly important how we live in public, or how we present ourselves in public is how we should be in private. And so I think the continuity should always be there, because we're persons of the cloth. So I want to center our conversation around, and I want to pull on your wisdom, your insight on just image and integrity, and just get some wisdom. So I want to start out by asking you this particular question. Call to preach and lead requires us to be ethical, irreproachable, upstanding, and noble. And if this is the requirement, should the priority be placed on how we steward our image or being integral?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is a great question. And it's a little bit nuanced too. You got me in a space, because we're living, it's 2023. The reality is every preacher, every pastor, every ministry leader is endeavoring to be real relevant, right? What does that mean? That means that there must be an image that we must portray. I'm not saying that image is a fake image or a counterfeit image, but there is an image that we must portray. You go on social media, we all have a page. Your ministry has a page, so there's an image that we're portraying. So when you talk about that image and integrity, I don't know that it's one against the other. I think that there's a both and that can live. So in the sense of the image, there should be an image, but you know the old saying, what's the use of being a public success and a private failure?
Right.
So that there should be an image. The question is, what type of image are we portraying? So it's important for us to say, yes, I want to be intentional about my image, brand, right? I want to be intentional about how I come across. I want to be intentional about my gear, what I wear. I want to be intentional about, how it is that I communicate. But then at the same time, I think it's important for us to say, I'm not going to sacrifice my integrity on the altar of my image. Right. So it's important for me to understand that, wow, what I want to portray is not something other than who I really am. I just want to illuminate who it is that I am. Right. For me, so that's something that in total transparency, that's something that I always wrestle with. I say I got a love-hate relationship with social media, right? Nobody posts their arguments on social media. Like no couple is on there just saying, look, we just got into it, right?
Right.
So, and even with ministry, very often do you see people post ministry failures.
Right.
How many pastors post that sermon that didn't go well, right? What do? We edit it. We edit out the ums and we edit out the buts and all of that. So we make it nice and so in a real sense, I think if we're not careful, we'll start to try and portray an image that is not necessarily in line with who it is that we are behind that image. Right. So to your question, man, I think that in the day and age that we live in, it is imperative that the preacher and the minister, the pastor, is cognizant about what do I look like? What do people see when they see me? Right. I can't have my head in the sand to think that all they want to do is just hear my word. Right. No, but they're looking at you. Right. They're looking at us. They're hearing us communicate. Right. So it's just important not to let those two things be in stark contradiction. Right. So use the limelight to highlight who it is that you are outside of the limelight.
Right. And that segue us into this particular question. Of course, like you said, what we present, social media can sometimes just make us look so perfect. And it really doesn't portray, but who wants to portray, that part of themselves? Which I think transparency is good. So our image is what we present when we're in the spotlight, of course, like you just stated. What would you say is the cause of us hiding behind the image for the purpose of concealing who we really are? Let's dive a little deeper into that.
Yeah, man, listen. So you brought me on the podcast to get
hot seat.
Okay. Yeah, hot seat. So I think to your question, process, right? Okay. So a lot of times, this is a pastor's podcast. So a lot of times our people are allowed to be in process and the pastor is not.
Wow, that's good, bro.
Unfortunately.
Right.
So what ends up happening is pastors, good, well-meaning pastors, oftentimes find themselves presenting themselves in a way that they know the people want to see them, as opposed to going behind the veil and portraying who it is that they really are and saying, hey, y'all, God is working with me and through me on certain things. Right. So I don't know where that pressure lies. I think it's a couple different places. There might be some internal insecurity things going on there. There might be some perfectionism that God is still trying to work out of some of us as leaders, and that's fine. And then there might be some projected stuff from our parishioners. There might be a war going on the inside of us, like, my flesh versus the spirit type thing. But I think it's extremely important. I got to state this. I think it's extremely important that we not allow pride to pollute who it is that we see ourselves as. Wow. So when that happens, we start portraying something that we agree with, even if it doesn't agree with our private lives. Right. So it's important to kind of to live in transparency, or I should say live in transparency and authenticity, while at the same time being honest about where it is that God has us. Right. We can't suffer from just because we always have the microphone, we don't have an issue. Yeah. Now, there's some things that shouldn't be named among us, be clear. Yeah. Then at the same time, there's something to be said about allowing the people that you serve in on the process to a degree, right, that they can still receive your ministry. Gotcha. So let's talk about process. It like you said, it's difficult. No, I ain't gonna put you on it. So I believe many of us are in process. Indeed. Especially in private, and of course I'm not, giving any permission to live reckless. But what I'm saying is that some of us are going through process, whether it's in our marriage, whether it's in our own internal self. So what would you say? How do we handle process without it bleeding over into what we do? Yeah. So here's a curse word for this year. Yeah. Here's a curse word. I'm getting ready to curse on your podcast. This might be the first curse word on the podcast. Yeah. And it's called submission. Yeah. Right. Wow. So when you're submitted, meaning one, we need to really tease out what the spiritual leadership look like in our lives. Right. Spiritual mentorship, spiritual father, however you want to slice it. Because when you do, you have a place where you can go and bleed. Right. So what ends up happening is we substitute our spiritual mentorship for social media. Yeah. So what ends up happening, so now we have all of our stuff on blast when actually you could have had those conversations and had people walking through some of those things with you, and maybe you and your spouse or however that works, behind closed doors. And then you're not saying that you're not telling people what's happening, not saying that you're being inauthentic, but what I am saying is that you're able to properly work through things. Yeah. But here's the thing. We're going there since you put me on the hot seat. Here's the thing. A spiritual leader, mentor, spiritual father, however you want to slice it, they can only be as close as you will allow them to be. Right, right. So what ends up happening is if we go before them and portray a certain image, we're putting ourselves in a danger zone. So yeah. To your question, how do you do that? How do we deal with process? One of the ways that we deal with process is by having a circle of strength around us, which will be led by a spiritual leader of some sort. Right. Of some sort. And what that means is allowing them to kind of set what the structure of that process looks like. I can't go to someone for help and then tell them how to help me. Right. You know what I mean? So I think that's important. Spiritual submission to spiritual authority, and submission when you don't agree. That's important too. Yeah. So, and that's major advice because, of course, we talk about pastors leading pastors. So what advice, as you're talking in that particular vein, what advice would you give the person that's afraid, right, of revealing who they are behind the image, and they're struggling in isolation? Right. Yeah. I have a spiritual father. I have somebody that I'm accountable to, but yet because of the in-depthness of the issue, I'm afraid to reveal it, because for whatever reason. What advice would you give that person? Yeah. Oh man, that's real. Yeah, Joe, I got you on the hot seat, man. Nah, it's good. It's good because I love, that's one of the things I love about this podcast is that it's holistic health. Yeah. These are the conversations that don't always happen in the public square, but I think it's good. So here's what I'll say to that. Anything that's between you and the devil only is called bondage.
Wow, Foster.
So when you get to a place in your life, you realize the power in vulnerability.
Right.
So vulnerability is the idea of exposing the areas of your life that you know are weak and that you lack confidence in.
Yeah.
So anything that's between me and the devil is called bondage. Wow. If I'm in bondage, I cannot operate fully in who it is that God is calling me to be. Yeah. So it's important for us to be vulnerable and listen. So watch this. Thank you. Watch this. Vulnerability, an inability to operate in vulnerability will leave you in silent captivity.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
An inability to operate in vulnerability will leave you in silent captivity. So what happens is we don't want to portray who we really are because the reality is we can't. We are enslaved. Yeah. We are held bondage to our master sin. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's important for us to let people in. So exposure brings emancipation. Right. Yeah. What you expose, you're able to be liberated from. Mm-hmm. But what you refuse to expose, you will be entangled with. Wow. So I think it's important that we have spiritual circles, you know what I'm saying, that we can actually be a part of, that can handle our vulnerabilities. Yeah. Without judgment, that can handle our vulnerabilities, even without condemnation.
So let's dig deeper. Let's take the shovel and dig deeper. Yeah. What happens when we don't when we sit in isolation, sit in that bondage? What happens to our effectiveness? What happens to us spiritually? What you think happens to us?
Yeah. So a mind controlled by lust has an infinite capacity for rationalization. Wow. So what that means is when it is that we are sitting inside of something, we start to rationalize why it is that's what we're sitting in is okay. Right. It's not that bad. Yeah. And here's the thing that a lot of leaders fall victim to. And when I say this, Lord, please hear my heart. I'm not saying as if I'm like, I can't fall victim to any of this stuff. Right. Except by the grace of God, there go I, right? Here's what we fall victim to. We fall victim to this I deserve it mentality. Yeah. Because of the things that you do as a pastor and as a leader and as a church planner behind closed doors that nobody sees, the sacrifices that you make, mm-hmm. that your members will never see, the money you put in the offering when your church doesn't make that rent. Yeah. The things that the ins and outs, all of the stuff, the hours of counseling, coaching, and all of that. What we fall into is you know what? All of this stuff I do, I mean, it's not the end of the world if I just do a little bit of this. Mm-hmm. Right. And the enemy is not satisfied with a little bit of anything. Right. So it's important that we not see what we're doing. I say it like this, we not use what we're doing as a license to go do something that will appease our flesh in that degree. Right. But we use what we're doing as something that gives glory to God. So it's an interesting dynamic because as I'm talking to pastors and leaders and the sacrifices that, man, the sacrifices that we have to make, it almost feels like, man, I can do something. Yeah. I'm tired of being holy, holy, holy all the time. Right. You know what I mean? So we start flirting with that line. Yeah. And there's some stuff we can't flirt with. Yeah. And we got to be honest about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And my conversation with Dr. Eric Cummings last night, part of that conversation was on accountability, right? And so I get, the spiritual fathers need to be in place. What would you say, Foster, to a circle of individuals for accountability's sake? That may not be, the hierarchy, but your mm-hmm. peers or your colleagues or friends. Like, is it important to you? Do you think it's important?
Yeah, it is. And I'll say this. In my experience, it is extremely important. It just hasn't been as, I haven't seen it done well many times. I just want to be honest with you. I haven't seen it done. Right. And some people have a different dynamic. Some people have seen this part done well and not the spiritual son part done well. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I've seen the spiritual son part done well. Yeah. I have not seen the spiritual circle part done well. Yeah. So what ends up happening is I think that there's something to be said about community, right?
Mm-hmm.
So doing life together allows for us to grow at a rate. It's a part of our spiritual formation too. So
Right.
I think that there's much to be gained from a circle of individuals who are all in process, but not allowing ourselves to use process as an excuse to stay where we used to be, right?
Right. Right.
I think that that's important. I think it's important for married people to have married people around them
Right.
who are not perfect but are in process together. There are
Yeah.
some situations that you all will encounter we haven't, and I want to make sure I'm in the space to where, hey man, what did you do with that? You have older kids than I do. My kids
Right.
are not teens yet.
Right. Right.
I'm about to reach out to you, Doc. I have a 12-year-old girl.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
happening, right? So how to maneuver that? These are nuances that God has given us, because some of the greatest blessings that God has given us walks into our lives on two legs.
Wow. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sometimes we're running to, and there's nothing wrong with this, but sometimes you're running to scriptures. You can just run to somebody.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can just text. You could just call. So I think that there's something to be said about a circle of strength. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, man. Yeah.
Yeah, and to your point, when you said it not being done well, and one of the things that once again I want to highlight, Dr. Cummings, he was talking about with this circle of friends, this community of individuals, is that they're extremely honest, and not only honest, vulnerable with each other.
Yeah.
And I think vulnerability is not the license to continue to be where you are, but
Right.
when you have that accountability circle, but to push you to get beyond that place of bondage in which you talked about.
Yeah.
So let's shift here when it comes to integrity. Once again, I'm putting you in a hot seat.
Let's go, man.
We see it. We see the lack thereof, and then we do see it. I just don't want to point out the negative. I know some preachers and pastors that are very integral.
Yes.
With their ministry, their private life.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, we know some that are not integral. Do you think the lack of integrity could affect our ability to be impactful?
I think the lack of integrity definitely affects our ability to be impactful.
Mm-hmm.
Hot seat. I think I love y'all. I love this. I love it. I think it's important for us to make sure that we are honest about where we are in our process.
Yeah.
I think more so than a lack of integrity is the issue for me. I think it's a lack of honesty.
Yeah.
I think the idea of this portraying something that we're not, or at least not yet. It's okay to live in not yet.
Yeah.
And I think the world that we live in is, for whatever reason, whatever pressures are there, we're starting to try and portray something, because we know that gets a response that we want to get. Mm-hmm. But you can be chasing after response, but you're not righteous yet.
Yeah.
And here's what happens. We need to work through some of these issues. And I'm not talking about struggle. Right. Struggle is there.
Yeah.
We use the word process. Process is there. Mm-hmm. But at least have the strength to struggle. Right. At least be at a place to where I'm laying this before God. Yeah. And not just living a totally different life. I've seen it done very bad. And if I'm gonna talk straight, it's the only way I know how to do it. I've seen it done very toxic. Yeah. And I think, and it wasn't so much the issue. It wasn't about the sin, as much as it was about the inauthenticity. Yeah. And the honesty. So I think it's important for us to say, man, God is using, because we use people in the Bible and we tell all of their business. Like, that's the strange thing. David was a murderer. Yeah. Moses he was a drunk. Abraham didn't trust God. Thomas was a doubter. And then we shout the whole church. Right. But it's like, yo, who are you, Joey? Joey is a, right? Yeah. No, that's not a shouting point. So what ends up happening is, it's like, let's be honest. Let's keep it a buck. Yeah. And let's be honest with who it is that we are. That's not to say that it disqualifies us. As a matter of fact, it does qualify us. Right. To say, this is something that I'm working through. God has his hand on it. I'm not letting go until he bless me. Yeah. Now let's open up the Bible. You understand what I'm saying? I think that there's something there. Yeah. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And my second year, again, it's a transparent moment. Second year at the church that I'm currently pastoring, bro, I had a rough year. Like, I had a rough year. frustrations with whatever. I won't put it out there, but it was just it was a lot. And I found myself just angry, bro, like angry, and it was spilling over into my marriage, taking out on the kids. My peace was seemingly frustrated. And this will lead me to my question. I told my wife, I need to sit down with a therapist because something is happening to me that, that has never happened before. And it was causing me, like you said, to preach and shout people about the individuals in scripture. But when I got home, frustration was following me,
Wow.
and it led to being anxious and it was just building. And so I sat down with a therapist, man, and bro, she was that, I believe, that God sent person to emancipate me from what I was experiencing. So what do you say about Jesus and the counselor? Let's shift for a minute here as we're dealing with integrity and image, and the person that's the clergy person that's dealing with isolated issues, but yet they don't feel like their community is strong enough to be vulnerable. What do you say about Jesus and the counselor?
Yeah, man, thank you for that, man. That is that's real.
Yeah.
Because in your example, you're still gifted. The gift still works.
Right.
Whether or not the vessel is frustrated or not, it still works.
Yeah.
I can still do I can still do what God has called me to do. So listen, we need theology and therapy.
Yeah.
Like, we, in the multitude of counselors, right? There is safety in the multitude. That sounds like more than one space in which I can be vulnerable in.
Right.
A multitude. So I know probably in generations prior, that might have been something that's shunned upon. I think now, I think we are more embracing of the therapy aspect, at least from an image perspective. I think we are more embracing of that.
Yeah.
I'll say this. I got to a point in my life, like this is probably our second year of ministry. I got to a point where I started to say, I don't want to build bigger than I become.
Wow. Right.
And I started at that point to shift where I was making investments. This is just me. Prior to the launch of our church, my investment was in church planning, whether that be books, conferences, convocations, you name it.
Yeah.
That was my investment. And then something shifted. And I thank God nothing negative happened that made me shift. That's just the grace of God. But something shifted and I said, I want to become bigger than I build. I want to make a different type of investment. Right. So it was me being intentional about books that I'm reading. It was me being intentional about classes I go to.
Yeah.
It was me being intentional about, it's not just about what I build, it's about who I become.
Yeah.
I want my family to be like they are now. My family's great. I've been married 13, it'll be 14 years in June.
Yes, sir.
I have a 12-year-old girl, 7-year-old boy. They're the joys of my life. And I would rather be with them than be on any platform in the world.
Wow. Wow.
I would, and here's the thing, they would rather be with me than be anywhere else in the world. Yeah. I wanted to become the type of person, man, that changed my generation. Wow. That's what, and it's not about me. And here's the thing though, Spry, it's not about me becoming that type of person so that everybody can in the world on social media and at the mall can say, oh, that's that guy. It's not about that. Yeah. It's about the people that matter the most to me knowing, man, I love him. Right. Right. It's about my son saying, I'm going on a field trip. I want you to come. I want you to be my chaperone. Yeah. It's about my daughter saying, hey, I want you to take me to the store to go look for a dress. Like, what? It's about my wife and I just kicking it after 13, about to be 14 years. I'm trying to get her pregnant every day. She keep running from me. I don't know what's up. Right. Right. So, but how did that happen? That happens after an intentional investment in here. Yeah. Yeah. Not just with these. Yeah. It doesn't matter if I build another church. It doesn't matter, man. Yeah. But what matters is, am I intentionally investing into what happens in here and in here, whether that be therapy, whether that be your diet, changing your diet in terms of books that you're reading, whether that be classes.
Yeah.
Like that's the goal, man. That's the
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah. So let's set aside Pastor Joey Foster and let me talk to
Yeah.
you. So Joey Foster, the man, why is integrity important to you?
Yeah. So
I know that wasn't on the list.
no, that's cool. No, we good. You're good, because this is one of the passions of mine. So building something gets you likes, becoming something leaves a legacy.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to me.
Yeah.
Right. So there are things that have been in my generation, that have been in my bloodline, that are in my bloodline. I want to be where the buck stops with that.
Yeah.
Like, so lust, promiscuity, you know, you name it, drugs even.
Yeah.
Crack, alcoholism, all of that. That environment, that's normal to me.
Yeah.
Like, divorce, all of that. So I want to be where it stops.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, I have to be intentional, because I know that that's in my blood. That's in my bloodline. It is.
Yeah.
It is. I can look at on any side. It's there. Both sides. It's there.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I want to be so intentional. I try to be so intentional about what environments I can be in. I'm not saying this to brag or anything like that. I've never smoked a joint or drunk anything, not because God told me not to do it, because Lord knows I have done some stuff. Maybe that'll be the next question, and I don't mind sharing. I promise you.
Right.
I promise you. Right. So when I say, I have to give that disclaimer, because I'm not saying that I just been saved my whole life. The Lord knows that ain't the case.
Yeah.
Right. But there are certain things that I saw in my bloodline that I identified early. And when I identified it, I tried to do my best to kind of stay away from that.
Yeah.
There are other things that I didn't identify in, and I just did it. Amen.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was nothing for me to talk to women and have 3-4 women do it, whatever. That's cool. That's what I did. That was my thing. But what I'm saying is, once I started to identify, oh, wait a minute. I'm becoming something that I don't want to be.
Yeah.
Right. So I had to shift how I was kind of maneuvering in life, and I had to shift my diet in terms of what I was taking in.
Yeah.
I had to shift my circle.
Yeah.
Because you can't become a different person in the same circle a lot of times.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are some of the things that I kind of had to work through.
Yeah. I got a couple more questions, bro.
Absolutely.
Talk about the importance of being disciplined on how we safeguard what we connect to and who we connect to.
Y'all, if y'all are watching this on YouTube, I'm clapping. If you're watching on Apple or Spotify, wherever it is, I'm in here clapping, because we're getting to it.
Yeah.
So the discipline, right? So your goals should determine your level of discipline.
Yeah.
So what do you really want? What do I really want? I really want, more than anything, let's be clear. We have to be clear about what we really want, and then don't judge it. Don't judge it.
Right.
In my soul, what I want is, I want to be someone that my family looks at and says, that guy right there is our picture of what Christianity looks like, what manhood looks like, what husband. That's what I want in my soul. So I said that to say, because that's my goal, now I have to set my life in discipline with that goal.
Yeah.
So now, because that's my goal, Lord have mercy, I'm getting in trouble. Let's go here. There are some people that are great, but they're not great for me.
Yeah.
Because they don't have the same goal that I do.
Right.
Right. Their family, they love their family, but they're not trying to spend that much time with them.
Yeah.
You know, they love preaching at their church, but they probably don't want to pastor their church. And that's fine. Right. I'm not judging anybody, but my disciplines align with my goals. Because I know because I can see what it takes in order for me to be a healthy father, healthy husband, healthy pastor, healthy leader, my circle has to portray that. Yeah. Yeah. The people that I'm connected to have to want to be that. Right. Now, if they don't want that, that doesn't make them bad. Yeah. That just doesn't make them good for me. Yeah. Right. So my disciplines, and my wife always gets me on this, because if there's one thing that I've been working towards, is definitely being a person of discipline. Routines matter to me.
Right, right.
To the degree that it just gets crazy. But routines matter to me. So for me, I'm not a person that can spend a lot of time with people that don't honor routines and discipline.
Right. Yeah.
Like, that's just me. I'm being
No,
honest today.
yeah, yeah. I appreciate that, bro.
I need, it's important for me to have people that respect disciplines and lines of demarcation. And at this time, I'm doing this, and my sermon prep is this time, and this is my leisure time. Like, this is important to me because it helps me bring structure to my life.
Right.
And the people that I love the most and the people that love me the most are going to benefit from me living a structured life.
Yeah.
So discipline is major.
I believe, bro, one of the problems as to why the lack of integrity runs through the clergy community is because of the networks we've placed ourselves in, or the individuals, we've connected ourselves to. And because of their influence, because of what we see, what they're doing. And like you said, some of them are not just, on this regimen of just being disciplined, committing themselves to just being disciplined. What would you say to that person that's within a community of individuals and their influence is pushing them to be less integral than they should be?
Yeah, the simple, here's the thing. The reality is this: you are not going to be something different than what you're around.
Right.
It's just not happening, right? Yeah. So what really has to be placed on the altar is whether or not I want that, or I want to become who God is calling me to become.
Right.
Here's the problem though, Spry. This is the issue. Becoming a person of integrity is not popular. You're not going viral.
Right.
Nobody is in the back talking about, ooh, integrity, discipline. Discipline is dirty. Discipline is boring sometimes.
Yeah.
You're right. It's much more, it gets much more affirmation to be a person in a circle that has a lot of different things going on, because they probably have more reach than you. So what needs to be a check is, what are you after?
Right.
What are you after? You're connecting with people for their platform.
Right.
What are you after? You're connecting with people because of who they know. Yeah. What are you after? Is that why you got into this? Yeah. And sometimes we just need a recalibration. Yeah. Right? Why? Remember, why did you get into this? You got into this to get on the platform? Yeah. Or you just want to preach at that? Or you just want to be on that person's live? So it's like, sometimes I think we need to do a self-reflection and just think through, hey, what do I really want? Yeah, yeah. Right? What do I really want? So to those people, because it's real, Spry. It's real. It's people, it's sometimes in leadership, we become thirsty. We get thirsty for thanks and thirsty for the affirmation and thirsty for the applause. Because if you're honest, Pastor, if you're listening to this, if you're honest, you're never getting the affirmation you deserve to get. Yeah. Very rarely. Yes. Yeah. People don't know what it takes to preach 52 weeks a year. Yeah. Yeah. And not including midweek. Yeah. Yeah. People don't know the hours that you spend counseling. Even if someone told you thank you every time you finish your sermon. Yeah. The first thing you're going to think is, well, why they didn't say thank you for the last one? Yeah. When somebody comes up to you after church and they say, oh, today's message was good. Yeah. It's like, well, last week, what are you saying about last week? Last week wasn't good, right? Yeah. So it's this idea, like, we have to really think through, what are we trying to get from these connections? Yeah. What are we trying to get? What are we trying to get? And how would we feel if somebody was connecting with us for the purposes that we're connecting to somebody else with for? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Those are something we got to think through, bro. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think you talked about your Sabbath. I'm gonna go here for a second. Which is a moment to kind of get away from just the routine. Kind of get yourself together for the days to come. I think sometimes our Sabbath time is mismanaged by
certain curriculums, if you will, because we're trying to cope with, the demands of the call, and which pushes us into certain behaviors that is a compromise, one, to our Christian character, us as disciples. And so, of course, we mismanage those times of just, trying to just kind of get away from it all. And so how would you speak to the person that's undisciplined in that particular space? And I'll ask you one more question and we'll move forward.
Yeah. And that's actually a real thing, because what ends up happening is it's hard to unplug.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times the temptation to plug back in is there.
Yeah.
Every Monday there's an opportunity to plug back in. It's there. And then at the same time, there's an opportunity to unplug, but to plug into something that I shouldn't plug into.
Right.
Because that it cuts off, and you got to have a psychologist or psychiatrist in to kind of explain all of this. They'll do a way better the job than I would. but I'll just give you the ghetto version from Hollywood. It cuts off the part of our brain that is actually engaged when we're engaged in the work of ministry. Right. So it's almost the equivalent of a person going and playing basketball. So that dopamine that you get, we look for things to give us that kind of relief. So what are we going to do? We're going to lean towards the thing that gave us that kind of relief. Is that porn? Is that flirting with another woman? Is that whatever that is, gambling, whatever it could be, list it, whatever your thing might be. We'll look to that, because we're always, if we're not intentional, we'll always lean towards our default. So our default is going to be that thing. So what's imperative is that I put barriers and I put parameters around that.
Right.
And I allow somebody to speak into that, somebody that can ask me about that without me getting offended.
Yeah.
I got to have somebody that can say, when's the last time you watched something you shouldn't have watched?
Yeah.
When's the last time you spoken to your wife in the tone that you should have?
Yeah.
Right. When's the last time? So I need to have somebody. You need a person. Please hear me, because some of y'all, while listening to this, y'all deep, and y'all got the Holy Spirit, and it oozes out your ears when you talk.
Yeah.
You need a person that can ask you, when was the last time you was watching Pornhub?
Yeah.
When was the last time you had a little bit too much to drink?
Yeah.
How are you and your wife? Why is this important? That's not to make them your Lord. That's not it. But it's to keep us honest.
Yeah.
And it's to help us work through it.
Yeah.
Because please hear the language, we will lean towards our default. Yeah. If we're not intentional about putting parameters around it. Some of you need to put filters on your phone, all of that stuff. You need to put parameters around it. When I start feeling this way, I talk to this person. I'm trying to be very practical with this, Brian. If you see where I'm going.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to put parameters around that, because that way we can really guard ourselves from what's trying to ensnare us.
Yeah. Foster, we can go on for another hour.
Man, you got me sweating over here, man.
Man, I appreciate it, man. I got a quote, and then I'm gonna ask you about your favorite book, and then we'll close with this. Here's a quote: If who we present publicly is influenced by who we are in private, or will inspire others to do the same that may be struggling in isolation. What's your thoughts to that?
Wow. People are so there's this saying that God is waiting on your yes.
Yeah.
Right. We've all heard it. He's waiting on your yes.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a nuance to that is that, yes, God is waiting on our yes to be vulnerable, and our yes to express what it is that God is doing on the inside of us. Because there are other people that are literally ensnared by the thing that you're about to get emancipated out of, or you're in the process of.
Right.
And I think it serves them well to hear that there's somebody a little further down the line that can say, hey, listen, I know what it's like.
Yeah.
So God is waiting on our yes to vulnerability.
Yeah.
He's waiting on our yes to say, you know what? Let me expose this area. Because when I'm weak, he is strong, right?
Yeah.
So the scripture says that he's close to the brokenhearted.
Yeah.
He's close to the broken heart. He's close. So we always shout off in sermons and church services, we shout off, he inhabits the praises of his people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yes, that's good. Let's shout off that.
Yeah.
But man, he's close to the brokenhearted.
Yeah.
That's the one that's going to hit.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's the brokenhearted, the vulnerable, the weak, right? All of that. Like, so there's something to be said about us being willing to be authentic about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then allowing somebody else to be free from our authenticity.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Man, I appreciate it. Let me say this publicly, man. I admire and appreciate, man, your image and your integrity. I've never said that before.
Oh, man.
But that's one of the things that I get from when I see Joey Foster.
Image
and integrity. And I know it's a weighty responsibility, you know, but bro, you wear it well, and you don't know who you're inspiring by what you're doing, man. And I promise I'm watching that about you, man. So I appreciate that, man. That's why I wanted to bring you on to talk about this.
Wow. This is major, man. I'm glad, and I thank you, man, for being a brother and a friend, man, because all you've ever shown to me is a person that shoots straight.
Yeah.
And a person that is 100% honest. And you could have done this, image and integrity, without me. You could have done it because you model it.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to have been a part of this, man. And wow, man. I'm excited for you and Sean, man. I love y'all, man.
Man, I appreciate it. Man, before you go, man, I need you to give our listening audience, what book would you prefer? Right now, I know you probably got a million. One that has impacted you the most, one you're currently reading. What resource would you recommend for the listening audience?
Oh my goodness! Oh boy! All right. Well, let me do two.
Okay.
Let me do two. I'm gonna break the rules because I got to do one of them. Is probably is phenomenal. It's written by Joey and Sonia Foster.
Yeah.
And it's called Relationship Goals.
Yes, sir.
Before the other, right? So go to joeyandsoniafoster.com. To find out more about that, but that's there. So that's one, all right. And then 1A is, oh man, this is going to be tough, right? So to keep in line with the idea of the concept of this particular podcast, emotionally healthy spirituality.
Yeah. It's a good
classic. Then the emotionally healthy leader as well. I'm taking my leadership team through that right now. Emotionally healthy. So let's go emotionally healthy leader.
Right.
Pete Scazzaro.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at right now. Boy, that was the toughest question of the night of the day. I probably Jesus.
Man, I get the same response, man, when I ask about these resources, man. Listen, man, thank you so very much for being on the Monday After Preachers podcast, man. Your insight, your wisdom, man, your just practical advice, I'm sure is going to impact the listeners. Thank you, Pastor Foster, for being on the Monday After Preachers podcast.
Thank you for having me, man. I love what you're doing, man. I can't wait to come back. I'm booking myself for the next time.
No, you come back.